there are a few people who told me they want the recording, so I'm going to record this, and we'll start in the meantime. So hi everyone, my name is Netta Asner-Minster. I'm the Shlicha at B'nai Israel congregation, but currently I am in Israel, in Har Homa, which is the inspiration of this session in the first place to do this. I wanted to showcase or talk about where I'm from, that it's on one hand, often Americans know about it because of the controversy it had when it was first founded in the end of the 90s, but also today, why isn't really spoken about anymore? And I think you can learn a lot about where it is geographically and also politically just by talking about it. Great. So we have another person from B'nai. So hi, Deborah. Thank you for joining. And I'll just briefly, I should have waited a few more minutes because more people join. Okay, before I begin, and I'll get into the session, I want to share in the chat the links. So first of all, of course, I have to share the B'nai because it's my synagogue, so I still have to share the events that are happening during July. So that's the first link in the chat, and then we have the two Life Online links as well. The first one is to sign up for the weekly email, which I'm still in charge of, and you have really great sessions that are happening during the week. And the final link is for the Facebook group, and those are more day-to-day updates about the sessions that are happening. And Life Online is a project I'm doing with the Shlichim in DC or the DMZ area, and also the wider community as well. Okay. So what exactly we're going to be talking about today? So first of all, we'll be giving general information about Har Homa, where it's located geographically, how many people live here, just general information, first of all, about the situation right now. And then we're going to go into the historical aspect of Har Homa and the political side that people most often know about. And then we will also talk about another aspect about living here as well. So that's the general format for today. And of course, please stay muted so it doesn't interrupt. Feel free to use the chat to ask questions. And also, we have a few people here who live in Har Homa. So if you have any additional information to add, please feel free to add that as well. We're only 11 people, so whatever you have to add would be great. Okay. So here, I'll start with this. So this is the picture, but okay. So I was born in Silver Spring, Maryland, but I've been living in Har Homa since 2005. And sorry, this is not working right now. Okay, there we go. Do you see it as full screen? Okay, great. I've been living here since 2005. My family moved to Israel in 2004, and my parents actually bought our apartment in 1999. Har Homa was founded in 1997. And of course, being Israeli, when we arrived, the apartment was not ready. So we were living in Rehavia for a year, which is another part of Jerusalem. And I've been living here ever since. And I've been here for a long period of time, seeing the neighborhood develop and what it's made up of generally. So that's my personal experience in the neighborhood, basically. So Har Homa is the unofficial name of the neighborhood, but the official name is called Chomat Shmuel, named after Shmuel Meir, who was the deputy mayor of Jerusalem, and who was very much a part of the foundation of the neighborhood, and he was killed in a car accident in 1996. So the name was supposed to be Har Homa, but the official name became Chomat Shmuel in order to name after him. And actually, the first main road in the neighborhood is called Shmuel Meir after him. So that's just an important thing to be aware of, that in a lot of, for example, on the bus, it doesn't say Har Homa, it says Chomat Shmuel. So people sometimes get confused as to why they have those two names. So just to explain where we are, I'm going to share the map as well, and Google will help me with that. Here we go. So this is Har Homa, where I am right now. And if we go back a little bit, we can see this is Jerusalem, or what they call official Jerusalem. It's the most southern point of Jerusalem. We have Bethlehem right here. So the outskirts in Bethlehem are very close to Har Homa. Rachel's tomb and Beit Jala are already outside of Jerusalem. They're considered, in the West Bank or Judea and Samaria, whatever you prefer. And also Amat Hachel is a kibbutz outside of Jerusalem. But we have also, as here, the neighborhoods, we have Givat HaMatos, Arnona, Talpiot, Gilo, which is over here. All of these places are part of Jerusalem proper. So it's just this yellow road that disconnects Har Homa between the rest of Jerusalem, because we already have, down the road here, more known neighborhoods of Jerusalem. So it's really just a matter of a 10-minute drive, or even 5 minutes, depending where you want to go. So that's the location we're talking about generally. Another thing that I wanted to point out is that Har Homa is now developing to a lot of different levels. So because my family were here from the beginning of its foundation, we are a part of level 1, it's called. So we're like on top of the mountain. And I wanted to share this in the Google Maps here. So in this picture over here, this is the entrance. There's this ugly high-rise skyrise in the entrance of the neighborhood, which we have no idea why was put there. And our house is about somewhere over here, more or less. So that's the house and the view and the balcony that we'll be talking about. So we're somewhere here. So we're really like on top of the mountain. And the reason I'm mentioning this is because the Har Homa is developed all the time, and there's at the moment going to be a 6th level. And this picture I'm showing right now is Benjamin Netanyahu from February 2020, right outside of Har Homa. Again, this horrible, ugly skyrise in the entrance of the neighborhood, pointing out that they're going to be building this 6th level with 2,200 more apartments. And the importance of it being in February 2020 was that there were elections in March 2020. Benjamin Netanyahu was part of the foundation of Har Homa, as he was voted in 1996 for the first time, and Har Homa was founded in 1997. But remember this fact, there's an interesting fact about that afterwards as well. And it's often considered one of his baby projects. So he often comes to the neighborhood, especially around election time, and he has a lot of following from the neighborhood. It's a constantly growing neighborhood. That was my point that I wanted to make regarding the geographical situation. The next thing I want to talk about is the amount of people we have here as well. So according to the information from 2019, there are 30,000 people who live in the neighborhood of Har Homa. And I always find this amusing to compare, because John is currently in Traverse City, Michigan, which is the biggest city in northern Michigan. I remember our conversation was before I flew here. And there's 20,000 people in the city proper, but it's more spread out. In this case, you have apartment buildings. In this ugly skyrise, you have probably about, 50 families maybe, right? So 50 families would be way more spread out in Traverse City, but they're in one building in Har Homa. So that's how you have 30,000 residents living in this one neighborhood in Jerusalem. And it's equivalent to a small town at this point regarding the number of people we have here. And it's important to remember because it's grown a lot since 1997, but at the moment, at the place where we are right now in time, we're talking about a location that is a small town. Also, an interesting thing to point out is that the people who live here are mostly young families, between the ages of 30 to 60, more or less. You have a few people who are older, but you definitely do not have young families or single people. They definitely do not have single people in their 20s living here, because it's bigger houses that have gardens and balconies. The idea is it's designed for young families. Another thing that I wanted to share regarding the geographically where we are, just to point out the unique place of where Har Homa is, I made my sister who is not here, do a short 7-second video from our balcony, which is why I pointed out beforehand where we are, like on the top of the hill. So I will go through the video shortly, but we'll first walk through 7 seconds in its entirety. Okay, so first of all, because we are southern Jerusalem, we are on the border of the desert a little bit. So that's why you can see it's a little bit dry more than usual. In addition, though, sorry if I'm cutting out, the Wi-Fi is not always the best here. I'm trying to sit close to the door as possible to have the Wi-Fi. But in addition, there was a forest here at one point. So it's a unique combination. Of one hand, we get a lot of wind because we're in the border of a desert. On the other hand, Har Homa is built on what used to be a forest. So this place over here is Bethlehem already. It's really close, and as Har Homa has been expanding and growing more, and Bethlehem as well has been growing and expanding more, the two places are getting closer and closer to each other, which is really interesting for a variety of reasons, but most importantly, I guess, security. I'll just say that even this past Shabbat, there were at 8 o'clock in the morning until 11, these sounds of explosions going off, and me and my aunt were wondering what is going on. And I was like, what are they shooting in Har Homa? I mean, I came here for the time of a war or whatever. No, it was fireworks during the day, celebrating the end of tests for high school students. The reason we didn't think it was fireworks because it was daylight, but apparently that's what they use for celebration during the daylight as well. So I mean, it was fine, but just it's a thought that comes to your mind. Nothing has happened so far, but it is a concern for sure as well. Next, you can't really see it here, but just trust me on this. Over here is the tomb of Rachel. And when you're on the balcony, you can actually see this wall. So whoever doesn't know, the tomb of Rachel is an enclave that's under Israeli jurisdiction in the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, whatever you want to call. So basically this place is under Israeli jurisdiction, but in order to go through it, you're actually driving into Area A, which is under Palestinian jurisdiction officially. And the reason that a wall was built there, because at the time, during the Oslo Accords, that they decided the Tomb of Rachel would be part of Israel, there was an issue of Molotov cocktails being thrown on the Tomb of Rachel. So therefore, they built a wall. And just to point out, there's no wall here. Right? There's a wall around the Tomb of Rachel in a specific area, but here, if you look closely, you'll see that there's a fence that divides between Bethlehem and Har Homa. So they often have the discussion about the security barrier. I don't know the terminology that it's called. I apologize. But the difference between the Israel and the West Bank. I just wanted to point that out. We can even see it here, that there's two different locations, that they're all part of Area A, and how they differentiate. The final thing that I want to point out is this over here, is that you see that there's two streets that are leading from that yellow road that I showed on the map down to Har Homa. So it means there's one entrance into the neighborhood, which makes it, first of all, very safe. There's actually in the bottom of this hill a police station. So no matter when you enter or exit, there's a police station there, making it very safe, first of all. And secondly, the fact that we are lower than the rest of Jerusalem. So it means we get less rain, we get less snow, we get a lot of wind. So it's just an interesting fact that I've always, throughout my childhood, been so depressed that we got less snow than the rest of Jerusalem. So that's Har Homa geographically. And I'll just see if I had any other notes regarding, the other thing is who lives in the neighborhood. So I do want to show the video again. When we first arrived in Har Homa, this area over here was not built. So this is part called Shlav Bit, so the second level, that's like the circle and the buildings around. And actually about 2 years ago, these two buildings over here were built. And I'm pointing them out because they're Yeshivat Har Homa, It's a more, it is a Zionist yeshiva, but it's a Haredi Zionist yeshiva. So they're very observant, which for people in the neighborhood, and I'll explain who the people who live in the neighborhood, this act was kind of nerve-wracking because it's bringing this population of the people who go to the yeshiva in the neighborhood. So we still have to see the implications of if the neighborhood is going to change in any way, in a major way. But at the moment, the situation is that you have 40% people who are secular in the neighborhood, and you see cars that are driving on Shabbat. You have different youth groups in elementary schools that are secular in the neighborhood. At the same time, you have 60% who are religious. And those religious people are Haredi Zionist people. So, which means that they have a pretty orthodox practice and way of life. However, they go to the army, they do national service, they pay their taxes, they work. That's the kind of people we see in the neighborhood. So they're definitely more observant than us. We don't really fit in the neighborhood so much, but that's a different story. And you can really see the variety of people you have here in the mix by the different preschools, by the different youth groups here, by different schools. There's both secular and religious elementary schools and preschools and youth groups as well. I will note though that the youth groups that are religious are more religious compared to those in other places in Israel. Even just to give an example, Bnei Akiva, which is Zionist religious youth group, is generally mixed boys and girls in other places around Israel. In Har Homa, it's separate boys and girls. Okay, so just they are in the neighborhood, but it's a bit more religious. So that's what we see here. Okay, and with that, we're now going to go to the next part of talking about, I know I forget showing this picture before, just a nice little story anecdote before I go to the political part. This is me about 3 years ago. I don't know if you can see this. I'll make this bigger, then I can make it bigger. Do you see the ugly skyrise here over there? You see it over there? Great. So I am in Bethlehem. I worked in the Jerusalem Press Club, and we had delegations of students we would take to Ramallah and Bethlehem. And due to the fact that I have an American passport, I was able to go to Bethlehem. And at this point, I'm at the Church of the Nativity. So I wanted to also point out how, from the Bethlehem perspective as well, Har Homa is very close. So Palestinians also have concerns as well, if you would discuss this with them, about how Har Homa is really close. It's a built neighborhood, it's separate and all, but you can really see how close it is from the other side as well, which I thought is really interesting. Okay, moving on to our next part about the controversy, political situation that was revolved around Har Homa. So Har Homa was officially bought, the land itself, in the 1940s by JNF. As I mentioned, there was a forest here, and they bought it because there was a forest here. So that's why JNF had the land. However, in 1948, the Jordanians captured the land or conquered it, and so it remained under Jordanian jurisdiction until 1967, until the Six-Day War. And then afterwards, basically, it was part Israel. It was part of the land that Israel conquered. And since the 1980s, there was an effort to make a neighborhood here, and even there was a discussion of creating the sports arena that's in Malcha. Whoever knows Jerusalem, there was discussion that would be created in Har Homa, but it wasn't at the end. In 1992, there were lands that were expropriated. I'm sorry if I'm saying the word incorrectly. And part of those lands were considered to be Arab lands as well, that were not officially bought. And therefore, that was the beginning of the controversy in the 90s. And an interesting point that I want to say, yes, I pointed out that Bibi was involved in the foundation of the neighborhood, but actually the first steps to building the neighborhood were taken in the Rabin administration. So that's the administration before Bibi. We're talking about the mid-90s. And he was the one who actually was beginning to make steps towards the creation of Har Homa. However, due to the Oslo Accords, he was encouraged to stop making those efforts, and Benjamin Netanyahu is the one who continued that. I find it super interesting that it's in fact a left-wing government who was helping to create the neighborhood, because that also explains later on the terminology that we see in Israel compared to international media, which I will get to also as well. Okay, so then we come to basically the 1990s, and the neighborhood is founded. And it becomes very political and very much discussed in international media. So first of all, I want to show an AP archive video that I found showing when they were putting the first cornerstone in Har Homa, and you can see two demonstrations, one across the other. And I'm pointing this out because notice how clearly these people are part of very specific groups compared to what I said up until now about who is part of the neighborhood right now. Okay, so I'm going to just share the video. Here we go. I'm not going to show all of it. I'm showing clips that are purposely thought out. So we're going to start. So this is on, it doesn't have a date, but I promise you this is 1997. And this is putting up the cornerstone for Har Homa, basically. Okay. Okay, so you got who's one side of the demonstration. Okay, it's Yom Ha'atzmaut, it's Independence Day. Clearly see who's the group and what they have on their heads. Okay, you clearly know who it is. On the other side, okay, so we saw the other side as well. It says Shalom Achshav and Meretz, so clearly left wing. And then I want to point out one more thing that I just thought, as somebody who knows a little bit more about Israeli politics currently, was amusing. Okay. Okay, so the last person who I showed, his name is Itamar Ben-Gvir. He is currently known in Israeli politics because he has been leading the extreme right-wing political group Otzma Yisrael, so Power to Israel. And this is him very, very young. If you look at Itamar Ben-Gvir today, but he's here a yeshiva boy, so it's 23 years ago. Okay, so this really shows clearly that when the neighborhood was founded, you had on one side religious Zionist people who were living in the neighborhood, who were a part of it, who were putting the cornerstone down, compared to the people who were very much against it, who were Shalom Achshav, so it's peace now, Meretz. So you really have this dichotomy of that it's right and left, that it's, you know, religious and secular people who are for and against the neighborhood. Which is very different compared to today, when you have 60% of people who are religious and then 40% who are secular, who are here as well. I promise you, not all of those people are right wing, and they're definitely not all religious Zionists in that case, the people who are living here. So I will explain my theory of what happened, but I do want to quote what probably is most known about the neighborhood. That the quotes that were said around 1997 to 2000 regarding the international understanding of what Har Homa is. Okay, great. So let's make these bigger. Okay. So the first quote is in the top left. It's of the Palestinian Authority from the year 2000. I'll read the quote and I'll explain why 2000 is so meaningful. Okay. If Israel went on, this will destroy all the efforts that aim at launching a meaningful peace process leading to ending the Israeli occupation, which started in the 1967. I just did a direct quote. I did copy paste. So if there's an English problem, I apologize. So it's meaningful regarding the Palestinian Authority that they were saying this, because in 2000, Ehud Barak came with a peace agreement and offered 97% of the West Bank to be a Palestinian state. And the response was no, and the Second Intifada broke out immediately afterwards. Therefore, the timing that Har Homa was founded is very much between Oslo Accords and the 2000 agreement and the Second Intifada. And therefore, in the international arena, it is so politicized also. And that's why it's really important to remember at the time it was founded. I'm going to do the two quotes and I'm going to mention another thing as well afterwards. United Nations. So United Nations position on the illegality of settlements is well known. The Americans must pressure the Israeli government to stop settlement activities. This was regarding specifically Har Homa. And the most surprising comment at the time was from the US government, was Condoleezza Rice. And she said, we're in a time when the goal is to build maximum confidence between the parties, and this doesn't help to build confidence. There should not be anything which might prejudge final status negotiations. So this is the discussion that we're having internationally by leading people worldwide about Har Homa. It's described as a settlement. It's described as people who are settlers. Whereas my terminology I've been using up until now regarding Har Homa is that it's a neighborhood in Jerusalem, that it's in Jerusalem. And if you would ask also left-wing people, why did I mention also that Rabin administration had the idea? Even left-wing people considered Har Homa to be part of Jerusalem. It is not compared to a settlement or compared to something that would have been offered to the Palestinians as part of a peace plan. Therefore, it is really important and interesting to be aware of that terminology, because at this point, you know, when Har Homa was founded, we really see that there's a difference of terminology between the internationally and local and in Israel. So that's the political issue and the controversy that surrounds Har Homa. But also at the same time, the unique difference that we can notice between international and the way it's noted, the way it's spoken about in Israel. Okay. And just, I do want to add maybe a controversial that we can talk about afterwards as well. But the fact that internationally, this is the way Har Homa is defined, creates a situation where, in this case, Har Homa is a settlement that is grouped together with cities that are all, you know, Gush Etzion, which is beyond the Green Line, for example, but also somewhere that's built up. Or, you know, other settlements, which are, you know, Shiloh and Bet El and Amona, but all of a sudden just grouped together as one, when in my opinion, it's kind of not fair and closed-minded. And you really need to learn the differences between the different places in order to really have a meaningful discussion of what a peace plan could look like. What does a peace process mean? You have to understand that Har Homa is very much different than Amona, and it's different, you know, now than 1997. You can have your disagreement on, you know, that maybe it shouldn't have been built in the first place in that case. That's fine. But if we're talking about, you know, right now, annexation or applying sovereignty, which is super relevant right now, I think it's really important to make that differentiation. And I know that maybe might be a bit more of a radical statement right now than a more political statement, but I think I'm basically saying it's important to be more knowledgeable. And I'm happy to discuss this more afterwards as well. Okay, so this brings us to the last part of Har Homa, or the discussion about it. I'm happy to take questions afterwards. But between 1997 and today, as I shared, something happened, something developed, and I'm going to show an article in order to basically share what is also important to be aware about regarding Har Homa. When I was in the spokesperson's unit between 2014 and 2016, I worked with American media, and I worked with this reporter. Her name is Krista Case Bryant. She works for Christian Science Monitor, and she wrote this article, which I'm going to show. I don't want to say that I was the inspiration, but I probably was the inspiration. And I wasn't quoted because I was a soldier at the time, so I couldn't be interviewed for something like this that was political. But I referred her to the first person she interviewed. I referred her to a real estate agent who lived in Har Homa at the time. So this is from 2015, as it says over here. Jerusalem house buyers find leftist ideals cost a bedroom or two. Homes in Jewish neighborhoods in East Jerusalem, built on land captured in the 1967 Israeli-Arab War, are far less expensive than the western half of the city, drawing many buyers, but not all. So just in the headline and in the secondary title that we have there, we can see that the basic reason that people have been living and moved to Har Homa was the comfort, that it costs less, that it's affordable. I don't know, often people, we talk about the conflict so much that often people are not aware that the cost of living in Israel, and especially in Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, is really high. Sarah is nodding her head. She's aware of this. And the fact that it's still in Jerusalem, meaning you're 5 minutes away from Talpiot, there's a new highway connecting you to the entrance of the city. You can be there in 15 minutes. My dad can vouch for this because he would go to the cinema city there all the time, and it would take him just 15 minutes. Or he would pick up my brother from the bus stop, and also take 15 minutes. But you're living on the other side of the city, and it is a suburb, but it's also, when you have a car, it's so easy to go from place to place. And at the end of the day, I think it's important to remember that even just I'll just say that not all the people that are in this neighborhood voted for Benjamin Netanyahu. I tried to find specific information regarding the politics of who voted what and how many percentages, but it's either all of Jerusalem or a specific polling booth. So meaning if you have one school and you have 4 polling booths because it's 4 different classrooms, you can only look one by one. So it's very difficult to come up with all the people in Har Homa. But I did look at a few, and about 15 or 20% more or less are center left. Even I saw a few voted for Arab parties. So that exists as well here. Yeah, maybe people didn't know who they were voting for. Maybe they're extreme left, but that's my point, that you have a variety of people who they're not here because they're Zionist religious people like we saw in that video in 1997. There are people here who are left-wing, who are living here, not for the ideological reason, but they're living here out of comfort. I think it's really important to be aware of that, because I think internationally, when I've mentioned Har Homa to people at B'nai Israel, it's been, oh, that political place, that place is like a settlement, but it's not, I mean, today you can't say that anymore. It has 30,000 people, it's completely built up. People here don't see it this way. You could define it as a settlement if you want, but on the ground and among, Israeli society generally, the discussion would be that this is part of Jerusalem. It's going to be in Jerusalem, no matter what our discussion is. It's completely consensus. So that guy was probably right. Har Homa did create facts on the ground. But at the moment today, we have 30,000 people in this neighborhood, and the idea of evacuating 30,000 people is just not plausible. So that is Har Homa in a nutshell. On one hand, the geography and unique neighborhood, we have both secular and religious people here. We have the Haredi Zionist people, making it even a little bit more religious neighborhood, but it's still same Zionist nonetheless, and not Haredi at all. I mean, Haredi in certain practices, but and then when we do have the political ideas that are always connected to Har Homa, internationally, also here in Israel, people might not want to come to the neighborhood because it is officially beyond the green line. This is a known thing. At the same time, people still choose to live here out of comfort. And you have 30,000 people here at the moment who would most likely claim that. So that is the neighborhood in a nutshell. And I'm hope that you learned a little bit about Har Homa, about where I'm from, and also that it interested you as well. I think that there's a lot to learn about geographically the situation, as well as the society too, through just this neighborhood. I hope I left you with some questions as well and interest to learn more. So I'm happy to answer any other questions. And I also want to thank you for joining. I really appreciate it. I see there's no questions in the chat, so if you have any questions, just feel free to unmute yourself. Yeah, Sarah.
How has it felt over time, since you said it's kind of built up, it's kind of changed the dynamics? How was it when you first got there to what it is now for you?
So personally, I mean, if I'll divide into two. Personally, I don't like this neighborhood. Meaning, there's not, I mean, I love my family. I love my family, but there's no young people here. Meaning, if I have to have a car in order to, I met John because I walked 2 hours in order to participate in a discussion on Shabbat. The idea was engaging with Americans. I met him by chance, but that's how I met him. It's very difficult to walk from the neighborhood. You really need a car. And it's really built for young families. So for me personally, it's not been a neighborhood that I've enjoyed. I mean, I like it and I call it my home. I think it's really cool, but I mean, growing up here, it's not been the ideal thing. Regarding politically, I'll just say that when I was in Hartman High School, and I vividly remember, I couldn't find this article, but I'm absolutely certain that it came out because it really affected me, that Daniel Hartman said that Har Homa should be given back to the Palestinians. And this is about 2008 or probably 2007. That makes sense. It's probably 2007 when I first got into Hartman. It was 10 years since Har Homa was founded. And it was, so that discussion was still being had a decade after it was founded. I think even still then, that second level was not built yet. But in the course of an additional 10 years, you don't hear about Har Homa anymore. It's not discussed. It's really become a consensus on both sides of the political map. You can really see that those additional 10 years and, basically 23 years of the neighborhood have made a difference to how Har Homa has been accepted. I'll say that another thing that I did not mention beforehand, the reason that it was also so political is because Netanyahu was forthright and said Har Homa is being encouraged to be built to be a connection between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. He wanted that continuation of land. So when you say that outright, obviously it's going to cause a political controversy if you disagree with that idea. So that's how it is made political, but that's not the discussion anymore. Nobody says those things because it's such a built-up neighborhood that it's more looked at as the suburb that has more affordable housing rather than anything else. So yeah, thank you for your question. Anyone else? Nama or Abba or Ilana, do you have anything to add about Har Homa that you think is important, facts or interesting to note, or your experiences here? Okay.
Maybe I just want to say that we might not fit into the neighborhood that much, but it's a great neighborhood, and the people who find their place here, there's a really nice Jewish community and the religious community. There are a lot of kids. There are a lot of programs for the kids in the neighborhood. We just didn't fit in specifically, but I think it's a great neighborhood with
there's a
really
lot
wonderful
of
people.
No, you're completely correct. So, I mean, I've had connections with people who, I've babysat for, and they're very, good people.
No, there are also people our age there. We're at an age, we're in our 20s, and people got married and moving on with their lives. But
right.
there are, we did have
It's
friends in the
it's actually really interesting. So my other sister is not here, Avia. She was actually closer to her friends in her neighborhood, and most of her friends her age, and we're talking about 21, 22, are married, and some of them have 2 kids already. So, I mean, yes, you could see already through that they're more Orthodox. And that maybe they feel more comfortable here because then they can, have affordable housing here. But when you're 20, you are probably not living here. You're living outside this neighborhood. So that's just an interesting thing to note as well. Do you have anything else to say? Yeah.
How did your father decide, or your parents, I should say, decide this was where they wanted to move out of anywhere in Israel?
I think Abba should answer that.
Yeah.
Can you answer that?
Yeah, we were living in the States, and we never made a trip to. My wife's family are Sabras, and they were living here, and they told us about this new neighborhood that was. at that time, they didn't know if it would take off, if it would be successful. It was a what do you call it? It was I mean, it was like dirt roads. It was early stages of development, and it was very affordable. And we got in on the ground floor, and I looked into it at the time, and we got an apartment about twice the size of any apartment we could have gotten elsewhere in Jerusalem. And this is what was recommended to me. I relied on my wife's family, and my kids have lived to regret it.
I'll say that we have a very big house, right? We have a big apartment. There's a
You're
lot of
making
room.
it sound worse than it was. I don't agree with you guys.
So I mean, I'm just okay.
Now, let me put it in perspective. that for Netta particularly, when we moved in, there were almost no kids that were her age. So that was a real defect for her. She had no one to play with, no one to socialize with, and Nama had fewer people. For some reason, there were fewer people her age. Avia, who is between the two, she had a lot of people that she socialized with. But today, there are people of all ages. It's really mixed. Anybody would be comfortable here. If we were coming now, we would be very comfortable, other than the fact that we couldn't afford it.
I'll just note the apartment is way bigger than you would get in Jerusalem. We have a
Yes.
garden as well. We have a nice balcony. We have a beautiful view, and you wouldn't be able to get that anywhere else in Jerusalem. So it's like the same reason people live in Ma'ale Adumim, for example, which is not part of Jerusalem, but it's that same kind of beautiful view, big houses, just the northern part of Jerusalem. So
for myself, I like the apartment. I like the community. I like the shul. I mean, we don't even have a shul. We've been davening in the community center, but the shul is almost built. We all chipped in, and we have some real machers in the neighborhood that devoted a lot of time and effort to build the shul, and I like the people. I like the neighborhood. I'm very happy here, but it's not perfect.
Oh, no, it's perfect.
Okay. Any other questions, or can I fill in any blanks or whatever?
So thank you, Abba, for helping me lead the session. And so if there's any other questions, feel free. And if not, then we will end here.
I mean, it's very understandable. Jerusalem and Tel Aviv are like so expensive, and that's why people start to move out to other areas, Herzliya, wherever it may be, Netanya, start getting more people. There's a lot of beautiful areas that I think a lot of people don't think about in Israel coming from the States, because they go, oh, there's Tel Aviv, there's Yerushalayim, there's the Negev, and they forget all the places in between. But
those suburbs. I was on a session yesterday. I'm part of this fellowship, and somebody said, in order to learn Jerusalem, really, you need to visit the periphery. And I think that's very true. That being here, you can really understand the complexity of Israel. That yes, internationally it's controversial, but at the end of the day, people want to live here because they need to live. That's it. And that's the debate basically at the end of the day.
But I understand it too. I mean, I have family in Gush Etzion, Neve Daniel, so when you were talking settlements versus not, I understand that as well. But they live pretty peacefully. I mean, there was an attack right after my parents were there a couple years ago. In a parking lot. But for the most part, it's more peaceful than I think Americans can even understand until you go and you see and you experience it yourself.
Completely agree. At the end, I think there are no more questions. Otherwise, people would unmute themselves. So I want to thank you for joining. I had a lot of fun sharing about my neighborhood, and I hope that you found it meaningful and interesting as well. And I wish you an early Shabbat Shalom. And I hope to see you. I'm going to be back in August, and I'll be doing more sessions, so I will see you then. Bye, everyone.
תודה רבה.
Bye-bye.
להתראות.
Joy, thank you for everything.
Thank you.
Bye, Netta.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye,
Bye.
Netta. Bye-bye, Nama.